We are live streaming. Excellent. Good evening, everybody. Once again, this is Greg Morris, co-chair of the Housing Committee. I'm going to give another couple minutes for our presenters. We have one on, we're waiting for the second. And once that's set, we can jump in with tonight's agenda. Thank you all for your presence in advance. I see folks joining us in real time here. Oh, there's Vic Bach, I see. Awesome. Okay. All right, Sam, you're there. Vic, I believe, has joined us as well. Is he ready?
Ready whenever you are.
Okay. All right. So first off, welcome everybody. It's great to have you all. Thank you for being present this evening at the CB8 Housing Committee meeting, February 2022. So we have had a number of conversations over the last, or at least in my role as co-chair, been present in having a lot of conversation about what we can do, how we can do it, how we can get engaged in making things happen and address what has been identified as the highest community needs assessment item for this community board, which is finding and accessing and increasing affordable housing. And we've had some really robust conversations at our last meeting. If you recall, we talked about Governor Hochul's address and some of the content that was in the State of the State. And we think that was a helpful sort of way of just talking and reflecting as to what was out there. But we don't necessarily have the expertise. We've got a lot of experience and a lot of history and a lot of background, but we don't necessarily have the expertise. So I am thrilled today. And I mean this sincerely because, guys, we've been talking about you coming to be part of this conversation for a while. So Vic Bach is here. Sam Stein is here from Community Service Society. Again, I just want to say your names have come up a number of times during our conversations, and we tried to reach out before to get you to come and present and be present with us. We're thrilled that you're here tonight. So I think our plan here is you were going to kind of start by talking about the state, I think, and then I think we're going to kind of get into potentially some of the options and possibilities we can think about as well. No formal presentation here. I know it's a conversation, and we're really excited to have you, one. And two, we'll certainly allow for Q&A because I'm sure our committee members will have lots of thoughts and reflections as we jump in. So on that note, thrilled that Vic Bach, Sam Stein are here from Community Service Society. And I'll turn the floor over to you, gentlemen.
I just want to say it's thrilling to be with you again, CB8 Housing Committee. I'll let Sam kick it off. But at some point, I'd love to know what the committee's been up to for the last, it's been a while, about a year or two since we were with you. What the committee's been up to, we'd love to know.
Great. We'll definitely dig in. I'd love to hear from you first, and then we'll dig in, I think, as we go. So thank you for that. Great to have you.
Happy to be here. Happy to see some familiar faces in the CB8 Housing Committee. We thought we'd get started with a discussion of what was discussed in the State of the State address, and more importantly, in the governor's executive budget, though I hear that you did that last time. So maybe we won't take up too much time with that, but we'll give you some of our takes about what was and was not in that.
We were very surface level, so you run with it. Thank you.
Okay, and then we'd love to talk more about strategies for increasing affordability in your district. So there's a few big ticket housing items that were in the executive budget that are definitely going to be the subject of debate and negotiation over the next few months as the budget gets hashed out. One of the big ones that we're following is 421A, which I'm sure you're familiar with. This is the state law about New York City property taxes, and it is a major tax abatement for new residential developments in New York City. The program was last renewed for 2017 and expires this coming June. It is the single highest housing expenditure for New York City. We lose more to 421A than we pay on any other single budget item in housing. So this is a very expensive program, which has produced mostly not that affordable housing. Most of the housing that's being produced through 421A right now is market rate, and the affordable section is about 3/4 for people who make 130% of the area median income. The Hochul proposal formally does away with 421A and replaces it with a system that has lower AMI levels for the affordable housing, going down between 40 and 80% of AMI for bigger buildings, 90% of AMI for smaller buildings and rentals, and then has a condo program which is targeted at people making 130% AMI. In a lot of ways, this is still 421A. It subsidizes the entire building, not just the affordable housing, though it does improve the affordability criteria. So that's one big item. Another one that we've been following is around hotel to housing conversions. Last year, we were part of the group that fought for the Housing Our Neighbors with Dignity Act, or HONDA, which is a framework for the state to support the conversion of distressed hotels or even office buildings into deeply affordable housing for homeless and low and moderate income people. One thing that bill did not do was deal with the questions of zoning and certificates of occupancy. We did have a version of the bill that had a workaround for the city to get around those issues, but that was stripped out of the final bill that passed. The governor has proposed basically putting that back in. What's unclear is she putting that back into HONDA with all the tenant protections that came with that bill? Or is it a parallel track for developers to convert hotels into housing without going through some of the regulations that we put into HONDA, like that it was for nonprofits, not for-profits? That is yet to be seen. There's language around accessory dwelling units, which is a way of making more housing stock out of what already exists. There's probably not a ton of room for accessory dwelling units in CB8, the way that there would be in, say, Bay Ridge, which has a lot of basement apartments, which could be legalized through this. But it's a way of making safe and legal existing accessory dwelling units, as well as creating new ones. There's language in the budget around improving access to housing for people with prior criminal convictions, which is a very important housing justice issue for people who are excluded from certain forms of housing, though it contains a very large loophole that might make it less than effective. So that'll have to be worked on further. And the budget includes expanding the state FEPS voucher program, which is mostly a homelessness prevention program for low-income families. So helping keep people in their homes, though it is also available to people in domestic violence shelters who are seeking family housing. So those are some of the big ticket items that are in the budget. I'll say one that's not, and then I'll pass to Vic for another. One that's not is what we call good cause eviction protections. Good cause eviction protection says that a landlord can't evict a tenant without cause. If the tenant is paying the rent, if they're not destroying the property or being a nuisance, they should be offered a lease renewal, and it should have a rent increase that's either 3% or commensurate with inflation. There shouldn't be the ability for the landlord to, quadruple the rent just to get rid of a tenant out of discriminatory reasons or for any other, if they're paying the rent and being a good tenant. That's a very important bill for tenant advocates like us. It's currently not in the executive budget, but we'd love to see it in there in the final version. I'll pass to Vic to talk about one other major piece that is not in the budget.
Right, NYCHA seems to be missing in action. Soon after Kathy Hochul was named governor, she registered her concern about NYCHA and charged the Lieutenant Governor, Brian Benjamin, with leading a task force, a NYCHA task force, to make recommendations about the future of NYCHA. So she clearly set her mark in focusing her concern in part on the New York City public housing dilemma. Unfortunately, in the State of the State message and in the budget message, NYCHA was notably missing. even as there was a $100 million capital commitment made to housing authorities out of New York City. So there's still movement forward. We hope that the task force will be an important instrument for advocating for NYCHA in Albany, and that there will be options that are still under consideration that we think are important. I can go into them at some point if you want to do that. One of the problems is, of course, that the Build Back Better bill, which promised something like $32 billion to NYCHA, is dead as such, and current discussions in Washington about a compromise are not likely to provide a capital commitment, no less to NYCHA, to housing at all. So with the dramatic conclusion that Washington will not come to public housing's rescue, at least this year, if ever, it really falls on the state and the city to pick up the $40 billion tab, NYCHA's capital backlog. And we're still pressing the state and the city to do that, to commit about $1.5 billion a year each over the next 10 years, unless other options are pursued, like the Preservation Trust, which would generate a lot of capital on its own. So if you have more questions about that, I can go into it in more detail.
Vic, hi. Sorry, is it okay to jump in real quick, Greg?
Yeah, Ed, co-chair, Ed Hartzog, please jump in.
Hi,
Thank
Vic.
you
It's
so
great
much.
to see you guys again. Hi, Sam. Hi, Vic. Great to see you again.
Hi, and
I had a
hello,
couple-
Rita, just recognized you.
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know whether with or without the glasses. It's always great to see both of you. And I have other questions, but on the public housing, on the NYCHA, so with it being an election year and what we've been up to and putting the pressure on, this really, I just got to say, this upsets me a great deal. You're talking about $40 billion. We've passed how much money out of Washington, D.C., and you're telling me this chunk out of all that money they're printing down there. My commentary aside about that, but we were unable, that this is going to get dropped. Is that what you're telling me? There's a out there?
It's not as if Washington hasn't been doing anything. They've been funding emergency rent assistance and a host of other things dealing with the in the wake of the pandemic. But it wasn't a commitment of capital to housing per se, to affordable housing or public housing. And in the only major thrust there is the Build Back Better bill. And Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia pretty well nixed that as is. And we know that Senator Schumer and the New York City congressional delegation have been plugging very hard for the Build Back Better bill. But it's not likely to appear in its current form. And once the compromises are made, we're pessimistic about housing being included at all, no less public housing. So it's a matter of whether Washington is committing capital for affordable housing development and preservation. And that was specifically in the Build Back Better bill.
Yeah, no, your point is well taken, Vic. My point was, I guess, my disappointment is that that portion for housing, for this kind of capital need, I don't know, call me crazy. I see that kind of infrastructure, and that is infrastructure. And if we were going to pass a bill, you take, that portion of the Build Back Better bill, how many thousands of pages, you take those pages, you move it into that one, so that money is is allocated to us, because listening to you say how in the future we're going to need,
If
Billion.
only the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed doesn't include housing at all.
right? Right.
If they break up the Build Back Better bill into components, those will probably need a vote of 60 in the Senate. They'll not be done under something called budget reconciliation.
Right.
And the chances of housing getting a share of it are very small, if at all. I hate saying it, but
No, thanks. That was
So-
all.
Yeah,
go
do we
ahead.
want to pause here and at least start some questions? I know there's more content to cover in terms of strategies, but would love to sort of begin some dialogue if that's okay. Rita, do you want to jump in?
you're muted, Rita.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
There
Hi,
you go.
Vic. I haven't
Hi.
seen you for a while. I'm glad to see you. We know what we're not going, what they plan not to give us. However, there are things in the world that are examples of what happens when you don't have, you make edicts that don't have any ramifications. I'm going to use China as the example because I just read the article in the Times about when Mao Zedong said only one child. And now, 20 years later, they're missing a workforce.
Mhm.
And so now they're saying, no, please have 2 children. But those people who are having children said, we don't want to get married. We don't want to have children. So there is a ripple effect. Let's talk about the ripple effect of not having affordable housing. We really learned something. I shouldn't say we learned because some people never learn. We saw examples in the pandemic of things that we never saw before, such as all the office space people, those companies still worked, but the people worked at home. And now they're saying, why should we pay the rent for this high office space? And well, the hell with the little small sandwich place on the corner that used to make sandwiches for those people who work there. See where I'm going with this long-term, if we don't have affordable housing, that we won't have essential workers when I'm talking about the people who clean the floors in the hospitals, the people who drive the buses, the school teachers, etc. You all know who I'm talking about. If we don't get 100%, we have lost in New York City over 100,000 affordable apartments. In Community Board 8, we have lost 14,000, and every day we lose more because they take down some more brownstones, the walk-ups, and put up high-rise market rate apartments. If we don't do that, what are we creating? Where is anybody looking at what the future is going to be if we don't do something? You know, it's like if you don't take the vaccine, you may get COVID. If you don't do affordable housing, what could happen to us?
Sam, you want to take that?
Sure, I'll start, and I'm sure you'll have more to add, Vic. But you know, my first thought is that Vic and I and our coworker in housing, Oksana, we're all planners by discipline. And so we think about these things, we think about the long-term consequences, and we think about the interconnectivity between housing and workforce and transit and everything else. But this city doesn't plan in that way, really. we don't have a comprehensive plan. We don't have a long-term plan. We have short-term actions and, short-term electoral cycles. And so I don't think that the city is doing what it needs to do to prevent those kinds of long-term spillover effects that you're talking about. In terms of what I see, if we are losing affordable housing at the rate that we have been, and we don't have a plan to reset it, the city will become unaffordable to the people who make it run. And then either the city will run no more, or people will be subject to longer and longer commutes that take up more of their day and more of their dollar. And that is, a kind of, in some ways, that's the norm in Europe, where the cores of cities are thoroughly gentrified and the suburbs have, large amounts of very poor people and working class people living in high-rise public housing. That's not the building stock that we have in the suburbs of this country. So the suburbanization of poverty looks quite different, and in some ways is more alienating and sort of everyone for themselves. I don't think that long-term picture is one that anybody would choose if they were thinking about the benefit of the city. But I think the short-term profit cycles and electoral cycles tend to override that kind of long-term planning. Dick?
Thank you,
Yeah,
but
no, I agree. I think the advocates and a lot of resident organizations, tenant organizations have spelled out what the doomsday scenario looks like, but the timeline for political planning is very short term. I mean, look at climate change and the failure of our institutions to really deal with it globally as well as nationally.
I know that we've spoken about this before, but is anybody making a plea for Michelama 2? Because I'm going to use an example I just wrote about, so it's in my head. There is a new development in Linden, in Brooklyn, which is in a predominantly Black area. And then there is a large development in Roosevelt Island, which is a predominantly white area. In Linden Plaza, the AMI goes from 30 to 100%. In Riverwalk in Roosevelt Island, there are 11 apartments at 40% of the AMI, and there are 154 apartments at the 165% AMI. We are not, and when the mayor says that we have affordable apartments, they are counting the Michelama co-ops, of which the city has absolutely no say over whether they will buy out or not. It is up to the individual boards. So people have been using the numbers as a sleight of hand. With 421A, every one of these developers got a 421A, and yet he's developing for 165% AMI, and he's getting the same abatements as the developer who's really doing a fair job between 40 and 100% AMI. So the inconsistencies, I know I'm preaching to the choir. I'm so frustrated that I want somebody to, I want them to understand the real numbers, not the fake numbers. Everybody uses the fake numbers. And then the fake numbers, we're doing great. We're doing great. But we are creating ghettos. That was a predominantly Black neighborhood in Linden Plaza in Brooklyn, in East New York. So what are we doing? Are we creating another Watts? I mean, you know, who said, learn your history well, for ye shall repeat it? And I feel that we're repeating it, only we're smarter, we're more analytical, we have computers that do a lot of things for us, and yet we're acting the same way that we acted before, even before they acted better, thanks to Mitchell and Lama. So I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up. I don't want to give up. What I want to know is, where do you think we should use our loud voices, and how should we get there and be heard by, do we get some Black leaders? Do we get some Latino leaders? Do we get some white leaders of affordable housing and make them? I don't know. I'm frustrated. But NYCHA's a whole other thing. You give them money and it's like putting it down a rat's soul. And I have a feeling that's why people don't give them money. They know it'll never get done. I have an article that ran in the New York Times that I will find and share with everybody. It was when the boilers were not working in the NYCHA developments during the winter months, and it was extremely cold. And one of the New York Times reporters followed one of the NYCHA people who were going to fix the boiler. And as he's tinkering around, the reporter said, "Exactly what are you looking for?" And the NYCHA repairman said, "I have absolutely no idea. I don't know how to fix a boiler." And that's okay. In anything else, it would be like going to your doctor and you get into an operating room and you really need your appendix out. And he looks down and he said, "I don't know how to do appendix."
Rita, let's pause there. There's some hands up, so I want to make sure folks have some time to weigh in.
I didn't mean to take up so much time.
Okay.
I needed to vent.
Vic and Sam, any thoughts or reactions to what Rita put forth? A lot of ground to cover there, I know.
Well, on the NYCHA end, it's I mean, it is a complex problem. Part of it is the lack of capital and adequate federal support, so things deteriorate. But I think there's been a very broad demoralization of NYCHA property management, given the short staffing, given the financial crunch the authority is in. I'm not making excuses for NYCHA. I would say over the last couple of years, with the presence of the federal monitor and the creation of what NYCHA calls the transformation plan, I think they are going several steps ahead in terms of changing in the way they manage their properties, and hopefully for the better.
I'll just add a couple things. I think NYCHA could also use some rule changes that allow it to work better. There are restrictions on what NYCHA can do that other forms of housing owners and managers are not restricted by, that don't serve the tenants well. So that's one important thing that we can change. On the larger question, I think there's a lot of lip service paid to integration and not a lot of action. And so, one thing that you all can do is say that you as a community board support lower AMI bands in the affordable housing that's being built there, and that you want this kind of mixed income integrated development. I think the assumption is allowed to let stand unless people correct it otherwise, that people don't want that, people on community boards. So I think that's an important voice that you all have. And in terms of Mitchell Lama, I can share in the chat a report that Vic and our late coworker Tom Waters did at CSS about what a revamped Mitchell Lama 2.0 could look like.
Right, we didn't get anywhere with Alicia Glenn at the time.
Right.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask a question, if I might.
Go ahead.
Generally, when I've been engaged with community boards, particularly Manhattan community boards, my sense is there is a structure that brings you all together. And I wonder whether there is a collective voice on the part of community boards across the city or across the borough in terms of pressing for policy changes, program changes, and taking a proactive stance toward things that need to happen. I don't know enough about how community boards operate and to what extent you coalesce. To what extent there is that kind of unity. But it seems to me that if some of the boards that we've been in touch with got their heads together and put together a letter on a certain set of issues or priority concerns, it might have some weight. I don't know.
We have certainly reached out, because you're on the right. We're on the same wavelength for sure. We've tried to get that going, and I think sometimes, as you know, in Manhattan and in the city, you know, sometimes I think localized neighborhood issues sometimes override. But you know, we're always. I think Greg and I and everyone on the committee were certainly willing to, you know, try something fresh. We have a new mayor, new city council. You know, hope springs eternal, right? And you know, maybe if there is something, your thoughts on that would be great, you know, in terms of anything you think that would be, because you go to all the different community boards. If you have an idea as to something you think would be common for all of us, you know, certainly I think we'd be willing to explore the idea of doing that. I mean, I think as a group we're stronger, you know. And just as a quick aside, I know we were talking about, not to change subjects because this is important, but I didn't want to forget, you know, Sandrea Coleman. I see Sandrea's photo here at the bottom of on my screen. Sandrea lives at Holmes and Isaacs, and I wonder if she had any thoughts, Vic and Sam and Rita, on your discussion in terms of NYCHA and what's going on there as well, because you know, Sandrea's on the ground. Obviously, Greg is as well, but you know, Sandrea is also a leader at Holmes and Isaacs on that. And I didn't know if she had any thoughts on Manhattan NYCHA at all. Just to throw it out there. I don't know. Sandrea is there. I don't know. I think she's still muted. So.
Oh yeah. I've asked her to unmute.
Yeah. Anyway, but didn't mean to. Well, if she jumps in, but.
Yeah, and we'll you know, just as a reminder to everybody, if we were able to jump in a little while ago, we're excited that Sam Stein and Vic Bach are here from Community Service Society, kind of opening up the conversation about the governor's sort of thoughts in relation to state of the state and executive budget. Thanks for getting us warmed up. We started to take some questions in that regard, so let's keep it going. I will make two quick notes in the last sort of piece that Vic shared and Sam shared about things that are important, whether it's a community board engaging in advocating for lowering the AMI bans. That's something that this committee has thought about. I think it's about how do we make it real. And I think at the same time, we've also, at the last meeting, we talked about a working group specifically that might work on connecting with other Manhattan boards, specifically for the purpose of trying to come up with one Manhattan voice around some key issues. So I do feel like we're in alignment with some of the things you're throwing out today. And I'm encouraged by that. I think the question will be, and after we take some more questions, maybe Sam and Vic, you can help us give some insight as to, you know, next steps and opportunities. But feeling good so far that we're in alignment with some of the things you're putting on the table so far. On that note, Billy, you've had your hand up. I'm gonna give you the floor to Billy.
Hi, everybody. I have a few questions, and I'll hopefully get through them kind of quickly, but hopefully I can get to at least a couple. The first one is just a clarifying question. We've heard a bit about how, well, we need to redefine how AMI is measured, because what we're getting now is a measurement that reflects not just our neighborhoods, but other counties and counties outside of New York City. But am I correct that you don't really need to change the definitions so much as on a deal by deal basis, or perhaps on a maybe citywide basis when the city says we're going to target 60% or 40% of AMI? That's what you have to change, right? Because whether something is at 80% of AMI or 30%, that is a decision that the city and state get to make when they decide how much subsidy to put in to mixed market and affordable buildings. Am I correct about that?
Well, I think using AMI is like using yards instead of feet as a measurement. And you're right, the issue is targeting. The issue is getting our affordable housing targeted to those who most need it. And the problem, as I see it, Sam may want to add to it or differ with it, is whether how the numbers work when you develop affordable housing. HPD has something they call term sheets, which provide different mixes or recipes based on income tiers and so on for putting together a development package given the capital of the city that HPD has available. Usually, since Washington has pretty much dropped out of the housing development business, we're in a situation where it's not possible to build affordable housing without what's called cross subsidy, without, in some sense, having market rent or higher rent apartments to balance the deficit created by having affordable housing for people at the lowest income levels. And the HPD term sheets are the recipes for this kind of mix. And unfortunately, I think the problem is we don't have unrestricted capital to build housing for those who most need it. The other dilemma that comes with it is that those who most need it probably don't have the income, by and large, to cover the basic maintenance costs. So that when you build housing, it's not matter affordable housing. It's not just a matter of having the capital to construct it, but also coming with it a set of operating subsidies or vouchers that provide enough of a rent cushion for the lowest income families households to be accommodated. So it's a two-horn problem. And the HPD term sheets are one way of looking at how you can mix and match these various income tiers in order to make housing development possible. Unfortunately, they don't target as deeply as we would like, but they do, in HPD's parlance, make the numbers work.
Yeah.
I don't know, Sam, if you want to add to it or disagree with it.
I don't disagree with anything. It's an excellent answer. I'll just add a couple things, which is that the federal government has, like Vic said, given up on really doing the provision of housing, but they still dictate some of the terms through the low-income housing tax credits and through Section 8 vouchers, which are often a part of the multiple subsidies that go into producing affordable housing. But still, we can target our AMIs lower. We do have to meet those costs. The only thing I'll add to what Vic said on that is that nonprofits seem to find a way to do it that's very different than for-profits. When we're talking about, say, 130% AMI tenants who we would generously call moderate or maybe middle income, but really are in the top 75% of New York City earners. In for-profit housing, they are often the affordable units, theoretically cross-subsidized by even more expensive market rate units.
Right.
In nonprofit housing, there might be a handful of units at 120 to 160 AMI, but those are cross-subsidizing units that are at, 0 to 60% AMI. So there's a place for that middle and moderate income housing, but it's not the floor, which is what it often is in luxury housing that has a little bit of affordable housing through 421A.
I next wanted to sort of go, Sam, to your book, which everyone should read, Capital City. Well, actually, that didn't turn out too well, but but it's a shameless plug for you there. But here's something you wrote, and it's going to lead to a question. It's you talked about how under De Blasio's tenure, upzoning was focused on predominantly poorer communities of color, not wealthier and whiter neighborhoods. You looked at an analysis by Moses Gates, and you said, there are plenty of predominantly white, wealthy, low density and transit rich neighborhoods that could receive that sort of upzoning treatment. You mentioned Murray Hill, Bay Ridge, Forest Hills. I guess I want to turn to our neighborhood, and this is a subject that divides, and I'm not, weighing in, but I want to know your analysis. So this is a neighborhood that's in many ways all those things, except we're not low density. We are probably the most dense neighborhood in Manhattan. It's not the entire city, so that's a consideration. We are getting a lot of, I know Anthony's going to densist, he's saying. Anthony Cohen, very smart on these issues. I think he's mouthing the word densist. But we've been getting a lot of these skinny super talls that are going up essentially to the maximum floor area ratio. The governor's state of the state, and maybe in the budget, I don't know, but the governor talked about raising the floor area ratio cap from 12 to 15. And I've heard some people argue that if you did this, you would actually on the Upper East Side get fewer of these super tall, skinny buildings because they'd be able to construct it a little bit differently, and you'd end up maybe with a building that's denser. I'm just curious whether you have a view on raising the cap and the effect that it would have on our neighborhood, and if you could tie it into our ability to get that affordability on the Upper East Side, I think that would be very helpful.
Sure. I'll first say I don't think the Community Service Society has a position on the FAR cap. It's not something that we've discussed internally yet, so I don't want to speak on our collective behalf. I know one consideration with raising the FAR cap that I've heard that I had not heard before is that there are commercial buildings that could potentially be converted to residential, but they are already above that FAR cap because the FAR cap does not apply to commercial buildings. And so if we wanted to, for example, convert some of the office buildings that Rita talked about where the commercial tenants aren't returning and renewing their leases, the housing, we would need some sort of regulatory relief in the form of that FAR cap being lifted. That might be the Trojan horse where that's the more sympathetic reason for changing it, and it allows some other things. In terms of the pencil towers, perhaps somebody else on this meeting is an architect and knows the details of that more, but I have heard the same argument that it's because of, or one reason for the pencil towers is the FAR cap. That's certainly not the only reason. It also has to do with the ability to transfer air rights and other quirks of the zoning code. I'd be open to hearing more about it, is I guess how I would answer that. You did mention our colleague Moses Gates, who when he wrote that article, I believe was at ANHD, the Association for Neighborhood Housing and Development. He's currently at the Regional Plan Association, and I think he supports raising the FAR cap. I'm not taking a position on it. I'm just saying you mentioned his name, and he supports it.
It's called densification.
Yeah. Well, I guess I want to turn it over to others, but before I do, to link these questions together, the governor's budget has subsidies for housing, the middle income housing subsidy. It's $90 million focused at 60 to 130% of AMI. That 90 million seems awfully low. Just when I looked at the New York Housing Conference report last year, United for Housing, they recommend that New York City, not the state, but the city alone, have at least $4 billion totally in annual city capital, including $1.5 billion for NYCHA, $2.5 billion for housing investments, preservation, and new construction. So am I correct that these subsidies, when you look at supportive housing, middle income housing, and so forth, does that strike you as pretty low in the governor's budget?
Honestly, I'm not sure which part of the budget you're looking at, because I think if you added up all the housing subsidy and investment, it would be more than that. I think there's $400 million for home ownership alone, of which $50 million is a very exciting pilot project around social housing. I would love to see plenty more than that. But I don't think that that's the only money that's going toward housing subsidy. I will say that we were part of United for Housing, and we stand by those recommendations.
Right. Yeah, 90, by the way, is just for the middle income housing, new construction and preservation. There was other investments, as you've noted, but it just seems like, for the Upper East Side, for example, if we're going to get the affordability that we're all talking about, you need a larger subsidy because of land costs, construction costs. And so where's that money going to come from? And I guess that's my big question. I'll kind of leave it there, but it feels like I'd like to see more money in these state and city budgets targeted towards getting the affordability that this community board's been asking for. So I'll leave it there.
You'll get no protest for us at getting more money for affordable housing from the state.
All right.
Let's let Marco jump in. Go ahead, Marco.
Thank you. I'm very happy to see you, Sam, again. And let me ask a question for Vic. Do you know what is the total deficit of affordable housing in the New York City area? Do you know how many dwelling units are the deficit?
Excuse me, I had difficulty hearing that.
I'm asking you, what is the deficit of affordable housing in New York City? Numbers.
The
Do you have an
density?
idea?
Deficit.
No,
Deficit.
the number of dwelling units, the demand, the deficit.
Yeah, well, I think it's on the order of about 400 to 500,000 units.
Well-
Are assisted housing that are targeted for lower incomes in one way or another. There are roughly 175,000 originally NYCHA units. There are still, I guess, around 70,000 Mitchell-Lamy units. There are about 100,000 plus federally subsidized units. Sam, how many low-income housing tax credit units are there?
I
think
don't know, but the
roughly
number total is close to 500,000. Like you
Ah.
said.
In the city?
Yes. Of
It's fine.
total of all of those together.
Yeah, it's rough. Yeah, I think they're about 400 to 500,000, I would say, broadly, affordable housing units, assisted housing units. And that's apart from the Section 8 vouchers.
And the
Yeah.
rent stabilized.
Well, I'm going to mention something else. I was in the meeting with HPD, and HPD, they said that they has been applying $1.1 million of applicants for affordable housing. And you say it's 500,000 units, approximately, or maybe 400,000 affordable units. You're very close, but I think you undermine that number. I think it's much higher. Let me explain you why. Because the issue is you measure basically we have to understand housing is a commodity. Housing works as a supply and demand. The more demand, the more expensive is housing. Simple, very simple. This is explain everything. So if the housing it has right now a vacancy rate of 3, I think it's 3.6. And according with the expert in real estate, a good market rate is to have at least between 5 to 6%, so you can keep a good balance on the affordability of housing. I'm talking about general housing. I'm not talking about low income housing, because that one then later they will impact out those units. So my point is, do you have an idea specifically for every group of the extremely low, very low, low income? What is the numbers? Do you have any numbers at all? Because we discussed the MAI, And they said, oh, I want 20% somebody. This the other said between 20 to 50. Well, if it's that the case, I'm going to be even nicer, between 0% to 10%. How is that? It's good. But the point is not that. The point is, I think you mentioned good points, and I would like to bring up. You said is the needs. What are the needs? What are the targets? Because according with HPD, and that is real numbers, NYCHA, the government of de Blasio, they claim to have 184,000 affordable units built in 8 years. And if you compare with 1.1 million, is approximately 18%. If it's 18%, obviously it shows that the deficit is very high because 184,000 affordable units to build. I don't know, I'm not challenging the number, but assuming that is true, is a lot. But if you compare it with 1.1 million of applicants, it just only represents 18%. So this is why affordable housing becomes a serious problem. This is not created for the Blasio administration. This is created for all administration in the past. Even the present administration, I thought that he can come with a very good, smart decision, but they are claiming, they are saying they're gonna build SROs. They are in that direction. They are not thinking that to build beautiful Michelamas. It's a very good problem, by the way. They are not planning moving in that direction. They are moving in last week, they said the person who's going to be leading that area, they said, I'm going to build SROs, which is basically, we are going in the reverse to provide good, affordable housing. Affordable housing is not a very simple topic to discuss. Affordable housing is very complex, and also is very complex for each community. In our community, we have one situation: no vacant lots to build anything at all. If we don't have no vacant, it's gonna be supply and demand, the price of the land. Right now, $90 million for 170,000 square feet. The lot on 78 on First Avenue, I think it was sold, probably a little bit less. You're talking about 400 or 450, maybe 500. But the more affordable housing we build in the Upper East Side, the more expensive will be the lots and the less affordable housing we build. That is one part. The other part is inflation. Right now, to build anything, I think is crazy. Myself, yes. By the way, I'm an architect. Yes, I do the design. Yes, I do some developments myself. Yes, I know the cost of construction. Yes, I'm doing a small development right now. But believe me, I don't want to build anything right now because I used to pay plywood for the deck $9.95. I was considered this a lot of money. But now you go to Home Depot, $62. How are you gonna build anything at all right now? The lack of the lack of the policy to control right now. I know that is not, we cannot blame the present administration or the Biden administration. We cannot blame because we know that one of the factors is COVID. COVID has been affecting directly in the production of many merchandise, and that inflates anything. Right now, if you want to build millions of billions of dollars, is completely unreal. In our community board, now we have one more situation. We are the densest community board in the city and therefore in the entire United States. So what I'm trying to say, to reach is and that's, I'm going to your point, Nick. You said, what can the connection with other community board? Every community board has its own problems and every community board has different direction. Our community, we are the densest. And so therefore our priority, it should be protect those low-income residents on place, and that will be the target in that direction, and build less. NYCHA, I don't want to talk NYCHA. NYCHA is a different problem, completely different problem. And right now, NYCHA, they have a program that they call Blue Whale, something like that. Very interesting program. I love it when I saw on the internet. It's a very at the macro level is an excellent program. At the micro level, I think it's wrong. But this is a good program that the residents doesn't want it, because they are touching their contribution to the rent. They like to have Section 9 rather to have Section 8. Section 8, they check everything. So I don't want to go in NYCHA, because that will be just only one discussion for this committee or any committee. It's just only NYCHA. NYCHA is completely out of the discussion. But I'm going to keep maintaining myself in the community board 8. So we have an opportunity in our community that we find it that wealthy areas, they try to reduce the density. And however, the infrastructure created for our neighborhood is very expensive. And those low density that are creating the wealthy, they are not paying for that, because the infrastructure underground and above ground is in place in our community. So we can create and we can raise money for our residents. And we can target, in our community, we have a large percentage of people that pay more than 30% of the income toward the rent, and a group of people that pay 50%. As a matter of fact, one person that everybody knows in the community board, I'm not going to give the name unless somebody asks me to do that, but this person, she said, I have 2 checks, and one check I pay for the rent, and the other check I had to save for the rent. So this person has our children. What I tell you right there, this family, maybe the parents said, I don't eat, my children eat. Maybe everybody has to eat one food. And so our target, rather to build affordable housing, we have to start maintaining our residents. And so there is different approach in the community board 8. Since we are the densest in populations in the entire city, we have to start thinking is how to avoid those people become homeless. Because once it's homeless in the system, it becomes even more expensive and outrage in the way that the administration spend money to house the homeless. And I'm extremely concerned myself, especially to have homeless with children. I think is one of the worst things that ever I can see it. So our target is not the MAI. Our target should be the people, the people that pay more than 30%, the people that pay 50%. That will be in our community only, because in the other community it could be the same or could be even worse. But whatever it is a very complex issue in our community. Housing is not very simple. MS, I admire you that you give good general policy, which is great. And I think I like to hear what you are mentioning. But the issue right now is how to maintain and to avoid those people become homeless. And
so let's, Marco, I'm sorry to jump in. I just want to give folks an opportunity. Marco covered a lot of ground there. Vic or Sam, is there anything in particular you want to respond to from Marco covered a lot of ground in his thoughts, a lot of thumbs up actually coming from the folks who were listening to what Marco was saying. Sam, Vic, anything in particular you want to jump off?
I don't have anything to add. Thanks.
Gotcha.
It's certainly a lot there, and a lot for you all to debate in terms of how you're going to do this in your neighborhood. I think there's different ways of measuring density, but we'll leave that. One important thing in terms of preventing homelessness, though, really is going to be making sure that people get the money that they were promised through the emergency rental assistance program, and passing something like the housing access voucher program, which is basically the state of New York replicating Section 8, because Section 8 only covers 1 in 4 people who need it. We could also do that with the city FEPS program in New York City, but some way of giving rental assistance, because as you said, it costs the city, the state, the federal government less to keep people in their homes than it does to put them in shelters. And it's a moral cost as well as an economic one.
That would be a good community board resolution.
Yes.
A letter to the city
Well
and
said.
state. Mhm.
Well said. Anthony
Or a
Cohen,
joint
go ahead.
letter.
Yeah, thank you. Anthony, go ahead.
Okay. Hi. I have first a really obvious comment, which is that the difference between housing built by not-for-profits and housing built by for-profit is about 25% of the cost of the project. And that's not bricks and mortar, that's everything. And so the fact of the matter is no developer will do a project if he's not going to make 25% out of it. And the fact of the matter is that if it is a not-for-profit, all of that money can go toward making the rents more affordable. So our problem as far as all of that goes, has to do with our basic system of development, which is for-profit developers doing most of the development. And that, you know, and it's sort of that's it. And then to sort of pile on a little bit, and not confining it to Community Board 8, but sort of looking at New York City as a whole. New York City is denser by a factor of 3 than any other large city in America. That would be a city over 1 million. If each of the boroughs were their own city, all of them but Staten Island would be the 4 densest cities in America. Manhattan has a density of over 75,000 people per square mile. And there are obvious reasons why Manhattan isn't going to get any bigger. It's the island. And I think that the city should stop looking at densifying the most attractive parts of the city and look to make what we would consider, and these are air quotes, the less attractive parts of the city more attractive. I mean, as it is, Brooklyn has a density of almost 41,000 people per square mile, and the Bronx is at almost 40,000, and Queens is over 24,000 people per square mile, all of which are 3 times the density of Los Angeles. And so that the way that we approach housing should have less to do with creating more units, 10% or 20% of which are affordable, with air quotes, but look to repurposing perhaps some of the housing that we already have. I think those are, we don't need more housing in Community Board 8. We need more affordable housing in Community Board 8. And there is, I think, a big difference, and something that the city government, city, state, and well, the federal government just doesn't care about any of us. What the city and the state refuse to recognize, that for every building that has 20% affordable housing in Community Board 8, there are 3 or 4 buildings which have none, where the average size apartment is 1,900, 2,000, 3,000 square feet and has nothing to do with affordability. And I think that's the problem, and that's the problem that we have to somehow get people to understand. We're building empty buildings for people to hide money in. That was all.
Any, Vic, Sam, any thoughts or reactions to Anthony's comments? Feel free to jump in if anything strikes you.
Right on.
Well, what can we do about it? You know,
Well,
I mean, it's
That looks so grim, Vic. You look so depressed as you said that.
I'm gonna, if
And-
it's okay, Rita, we'll come back to you. I want to let some folks who haven't had a chance to speak get the
But
opportunity.
I'll
to do
just say
so.
one
Go
thing
ahead, Sam.
quickly in response to that, which is just on the last point you made, which is to say if we taxed vacant property differently, it might make less sense for people to buy homes that they have no intention of living in, but just to make a profit from, and B, for developers to build housing that is clearly for that purpose. So that's another place. Unfortunately, the city doesn't have the ability to do that on our own, but there are bills to do something like that in Albany.
The other part of the dilemma is that despite the pandemic, the city is expecting population growth over the next 10, 20 years. And the city will need housing more than it ever has before.
Right.
Let's let a couple other folks jump in. Some folks perhaps haven't had a chance yet. Ed, I know you have some thoughts as well.
I'll wait till everybody else goes.
Yeah, that'd be great. Boaz, do you want to jump in? I'm saying that, forgive me. Mispronounced.
Hey, thank you. So I want to say that I, believe it or not, I agree 100% with Marco. Usually I disagree with his opinions, but this time I agree with him 100%. I think that it's eventually supply and demand issue. There is an housing crisis in entire US because of a supply chain issue, because of there are not enough workers and inflation. Huge issue. Now in Upper East Side, specifically I'm talking about Upper East Side, the situation is more complicated. Like Marco was saying, that I don't think that there is any place to build, and if there are like places where you can destroy, you can destroy a building, build a new building, and so on. It's a complicated project. Now, Upper East Side, Community Board 8, has a serious problem of homeless in camping. You can see it everywhere. And it's tied together to public safety. So definitely, I don't have the solution really. I don't think that it makes sense to. I mean, it's realistic to talk in today's political situation that to increase the affordable units in Upper East Side. I think that we need to play defense. Like Marco, I think that this is what Marco was saying. That let's say that today there are X number of affordable units. Let's make sure that we keep those affordable units. The second thing, we need to fight homeless, a decrease of the situation of families that falling because of a crisis, because of COVID-19. I have a lot of ideas about that, basically. I think that the world is now changing. There are a lot of opportunities today. People just need to make the change in their skills, basically to change the way what they are doing to make money. My only question is, and again, I came to the US in 2012, and maybe it's a stupid question. My only question is, our states are working together regarding the solution? I mean, for example, I know that the Upper East Side is one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the world, not only in the US. It's like everyone knows about Upper East Side, right? It's super, super expensive. There are any programs to I don't know, to find homes for homeless people in Upper East Side in places where it's more affordable. I don't know, Nevada, Florida, whatever. Are there stuff like that? That's one. The second thing, talking about creating more houses. I don't know if there are decision makers in the call. I read about, talking about stuff that I read about that they are starting to use Chinese method on building houses by printing, using a 3D printing. They are basically printing concrete and then assembling the buildings and making, houses very, very fast. I don't know if there is like a focus on exploring those technologies. But the bottom line, I think that eventually it should come from, I don't know, the federal government, because there is an housing crisis. Forget about, of course, homeless are the number one impacting it, but there is a housing crisis. The last comment, really comment about something that Marco said, that I want to add something. Marco said that basically the issue in Upper East Side is supply and demand. It's not 100%. During the COVID-19, lots of people left Upper East Side. There were ghost buildings. Now, because of the situation, and again, I don't fully understand the market of the real estate. Probably you guys are the expert, but I tried to negotiate my contract and so on, and eventually I got a good deal. But not the best deal. Why is that? Because you have those big real estate companies that own gazillions of apartments, and they are okay. They understand that they can, they believe that eventually the city will recover. So despite the fact that they had huge supply, they didn't reduce the rent. It wasn't like the graph that you learned in introduction to macro or microeconomics that there is a lot of supply, so the cost will reduce. The cost reduced. A lot of people got good deals about rent, but it could be even better. The problem is that those real estate companies, they have a lot of money and they could actually stay many years, with those supply. The last thing that I want to say is that
let's just for the sake of time, I want to
last comment,
please.
And that's it. The last comment
Thank you.
is that I'm born and raised in Israel, and in Israel, what they've explored is basically to tax a ghost apartment. Basically apartments that no one lives there, and basically to increase taxes to basically fight situation that you have empty apartment. I think this is one of the things that can help in New York City. Anyway, very interesting conversation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Again, a lot of ground there. Vic or Sam, anything in particular you want to respond to or reflect on?
No, I do want to say I regret I have to leave for another appointment. At about
Understood.
At 8 o'clock. So
that is the time when we want to try to button this up. So thank you for staying on for as long as you have. We really do appreciate that.
No, my pleasure.
Let's there's a couple people with hands up. I'd really like to just ask for questions at this point. I think we've had a lot of comments and personal reflections, which are fantastic and useful. But just for the sake of time, Ellen, I see you've had a hand up. Do you have a specific question for our presenters? Feel free to jump in. Still muted. There you go.
Muted. So yes, I'm going to get very specific with it's kind of on a micro level. Let's take one person. So somebody who is looking for senior housing on SSI, so can afford very little for rent, but they have a brother that can afford to supplement the rent for that person. So the brother can't afford to pay a large rent, but can afford, if they went to a senior housing that had an income cap that they don't meet because their income is way too low. Why is it not possible for the brother to supplement that income and thereby allow that person to take part in that particular senior housing? Like, what is the, it doesn't make sense to me that that's something that simple to allow somebody who otherwise would be homeless to participate in some form of housing that they otherwise could not afford to get, they couldn't get into because their income is not high enough. Does that question make sense?
So I'll start. Most affordable housing programs are the opposite way, that you can't make over a certain amount. So it sounds like in this one, you have to make at least a certain amount,
Yes.
but so that's a quirk, but ultimately it sounds like what you're asking about is a guarantor arrangement.
I'm sorry, it's not a quirk. This is always the way it is, that there are many people that can't afford to, like on Roosevelt Island, for instance, there was an income spread. And if you made less than that income, you couldn't apply for that housing.
Yeah, that was a bad choice of words. I
Okay.
appreciate the correction. But it sounds like what you're asking about is a guarantor arrangement, where
Correct.
the brother would be the guarantor of his sister. Why is that not allowed? I don't
Correct.
know, because that really is allowed in many market rate situations where, the wealthier parent of a, poor college kid is the guarantor of the apartment. I suspect it may have to do with recourse, that if the brother doesn't pay, they might not be able to evict the sister if that's what they want to do, but I don't really know the answer. But if it is how I'm hearing it, then that sounds like, an issue of housing justice, because some folks actually do have access to that kind of a guarantor system and then other people don't.
Thanks for that. Wendy, I'm going to let Wendy jump in, and then I think Ed had some questions as well, because I just want to give everybody a chance to weigh in. Go ahead, Wendy. Questions. Ideal right now is time is ticking down.
Wendy, if you're here, you could unmute.
All right. Well, we'll pivot over. Ed, I know you had some questions, so we can always come back to Wendy. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, Vic or Sam, I had 4 quick things in whatever order you want to take them in. I'm just curious as to, you're talking earlier about 421A. I've always been curious as to, now that we're getting to the end of this thing, what's going to be the impact on housing when all these people now have to pay the tax bill that they didn't have to pay for 20 years? That's one. The other one is kind of what Marco was talking about just recently. All this talk about apartments that we've been building, I hear this from these developers all the time about rent and it has to be higher, but I hear about apartments being off market, right? You don't hear about them, the shadow market. I don't know, maybe I've forgotten my economics from grad school, but it always seemed to you when you're pulling apartments off, it drives the price up. Your thoughts on that on a macro level? And I'll save the building one. The other question I had in terms of commuting, I grew up in Northern Virginia, and there, talking earlier about commuting, you just build further and further out, and here we don't necessarily with the 5 boroughs. My question for both of you in terms of long term, people in Northern Virginia now, they routinely come in from like Dale City, which is almost to Fredericksburg. I mean, you might be familiar with it. I mean, that's like halfway down the state to Richmond. What's your thought, as the last point, what's your thought long term about New York City turning into something like that? Like I grew up in Northern Virginia, where people just, instead of going up, we're just going further out. It's getting longer for people because the city's gentrifying. And that's my last thing for you guys.
I'm sorry, Ed, Greg, I'm going to have to take off. I leave it to Sam.
Okay.
Thank you, Vic.
Thanks, Vic.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
See you later.
Sorry to run the clock. Thanks, Vic.
All right, so I'll try to take your 3 in order, and if I forget, please remind me. But the first was, what happens if we don't renew 421A? But even if we did, to people whose individual buildings 421A exemptions are going to expire, then suddenly they have to pay taxes. And the answer to that is not a one size fits all. It depends when their building got their 421A. Some of them have a phase out period, which kind of eases the pain of suddenly having to pay. Some of them don't. Some residents can easily afford to pay their taxes, but have enjoyed not for a long time. Some cannot. Some bought their apartment for more than they should have because they wouldn't have to pay taxes for a long time. If the property values have gone up since, their assessment may have risen even more. They could be in for a very stark shock. If they live in high cost areas, they can sell if they have to. They live in areas where the value hasn't gone up. They may have paid more than they should have for the apartment because they didn't have to pay taxes. The next buyer won't pay that. So it really could have some strange market impacts. And that doesn't even have to do with whether we renew 421A, because when the program is renewed, old buildings 421As are not renewed either. So that was question number one. Question number two is about intentional vacancy. There's multiple kinds of vacancy at play in the New York market. There is vacancy because the landlord can't find a tenant or a buyer. That's relatively rare. There's vacancy because the owner owns it for personal use, but doesn't actually spend any time there. They Airbnb it, they use it as a pied-à-terre, or it's a pure investment vehicle. There's a surprisingly large amount of those. And then you have landlords who are warehousing apartments because either they think the rents will rise in the future and they'd rather not lock somebody in at a lower rent, or the one way that you can set new rents in a rent stabilized apartment after 2019 is by combining two together, which has two perverse effects. One is we lose housing stock as two single apartments become one. And then second, the landlord gets to create a new rent for that 2-bedroom apartment at market rates. Tenants call this Frankensteining when they're adjoining these two apartments together. And in the meantime, they're holding them vacant until they have the opportunity to. But if you look at the housing and vacancy survey, and we'll be getting a new one this year, just in the last one, the number of vacant units not available for sale or rent. So not the ones where they can't find a buyer or a seller, but just the ones where they're holding them. In 2011, the number was 164,000. In 2017, the number was 248,000. That's a huge, huge increase.
And Sam, if I can just jump in here on that and going also back to the 421A, what is so what's the impact on that? I mean, in terms of everybody else, I mean, that got to drive everybody else's rent up, right?
It does. And this is why, it's right and it's wrong to say it's a question of supply and demand, because yes, it is, but the supply that even exists isn't even available in full. That's a full neighborhood's worth of people, 250,000 apartments.
That's this community board.
No, that's citywide.
No. I mean, 250,000 is our community board. That's our community district is 250. Yeah.
Not just vacant apartments, but vacant apartments that are not where the owner is not trying to occupy them. That is a huge problem in this city. If we wanted to increase the useful stock of housing, one place we could do it is by cutting down on that 250,000 empty homes.
And
final question.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Final question was, are we headed in that direction you were talking about of super commutes? And the answer is yes, we have people commuting from Rockland County, from Pennsylvania even, where they can find cheaper housing. And yes, they can find cheaper housing in those areas, but what is lost? Not only what's lost in our communities as working class people are displaced and they become, empty ghost places where rich people don't live but own property. That's not a vibrant community. But then also what's lost in these people's lives that they spend 3 hours of their day commuting, and often in a car. So if we want to talk about the environmental benefits of dense living, if we're displacing our workforce to have to drive an hour and a half each way, we're not actually benefiting the planet.
Well, if I may, and I'll kick it over to Wendy and to Rita. Just again, I bring up the Washington one just as one former commuter to Washington every morning. Sure, there's no shock to anybody here. After an hour and a half in the car, battling 395 or 295, and then having a little caffeine, not a good combo. And one of the reasons why I'm such a happy New Yorker is I waved bye-bye to that car every morning. And I'm just curious in terms of the longer term effects. I'm just one individual, but to your point is, who wants to drive, that kind of agita every day? That's 3 hours. I mean, it was a 5 minute, and I'll go back, it was a 5 minute difference between a 40-minute commute and an hour and 5 minutes. That's all. And anyway, the point is, that you raise is I think maybe demographically it might move people into more urban areas, but back to the housing problem again. Sorry, Wendy, I don't know if you're unmuted or otherwise Rita will go to you. Wendy? No?
Wendy, if you're here, you can unmute.
No?
No one can hear me.
Now we can hear you.
Now we hear you.
You muted yourself again. Okay. Try it now.
Still muted.
Are you able? I can't hear anybody in the meeting, but I'm
No,
getting a
we can
signal
hear you.
from
We hear you.
actually from
We
my
hear
son
you.
that y'all can hear me. And I wanted to thank Ed and Gregory for putting this on, and Sam, thank you so much for being here. And I hope you'll convey our thanks to Vic as well. You know, we're really here because the 14th Amendment promises local authorities can regulate health, safety, and welfare. And we're really here talking about the welfare of people who can't often fend for themselves. There's so many good points that were made. It's such a complicated issue. I wanted to agree with Marco that data is needed on the particulars of who needs the housing, and particularly in our area. We have been fighting for affordable housing for years and years, as many years as I've been coming and listening to these meetings. We need an immediate moratorium on demolition of our housing that's currently in existence, because they are warehoused. First of all, those affordable housing units are warehoused by developers, and they're knocked down, and they can be left, as one developer said at a hearing a couple of years ago. It was held at Chapin. He can hold on to that for 10 years. And that's where supply and demand is a little bit skewed, because it's not exactly at the current market timing. You know, developers can afford to hold on to stuff for a very long time. We need a moratorium on demolition, partly to preserve affordable housing, and partly because by lessening that destruction, we're also lowering climate change pollution. In our district, you know, in other committees, and we should all be talking to each other, but in other committees, we've been talking, and I've been testifying for over 4 years on climate change pollution and the effects of tall buildings, not super talls, but just talls. We're fighting for a 210 cap. We have studies that show that anything above the 20th floor causes an exponential rise in climate change pollution. It's really not necessary. It's not necessary in our area. It's probably not necessary throughout the city. What's done is done. That housing is going to last for hundreds of years. And we don't need a greater FAR. That is a disaster. We are fighting against that on whether it's luxury or low income or any kind of building. We're fighting against that. And especially for health reasons, you know, the pollution that is caused definitely affects. I mean, these are statistics that are out there, affects people of color, our residents, our workers, and our students at a much higher proportion than it does people who have a little more. And it's outrageous to put this burden in the name of oh, we're going to provide housing. That's really, it's not necessary to make that distinction. The United Nations came out with a report in August of 2021. You can probably find the references to it on Bloomberg News, where they talked about the vertical height of the city and the climate change pollution. They specifically talked about Paris being comparably dense with New York, but because their housing stock is lower by design, they have far less climate change pollution emissions. So I wanted to ask if you will take a really hard look at your FAR thoughts, and also on asking for a moratorium on demolition. And in terms of NYCHA, perhaps there could be an initiative to actually let residents of NYCHA have say over what needs to happen with obviously some regulatory body, but that really isn't profoundly happening now in a meaningful way. I know we're really talking about budget concerns with the state, and I'm sure a lot of what I've just said can be monetized, but I would be very interested in your comments. Thank you so much for letting me talk.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. It's getting late, so I don't want to respond too much, but on the very last point you made, I think there's a lot going on with NYCHA, and NYCHA residents really need a strong say. And so Vic was talking about this task force that's being formed in Albany. We've been pushing to say, put residents on that task force. You know, don't have it just be people speaking on behalf of residents. NYCHA residents elect their own leadership. Let them lead. And then if we're going to do any kind of changes in the NYCHA housing stock, there should be a ballot in each development that says, do we support this option? Do we support that option? Or do we want to keep things as they are? Or do we want, you know, something new? It shouldn't have to be that, you know, public housing residents are, you know, told a new plan every couple of years, which is the way that it's been for a long time.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Wendy.
I'm going to give Rita the last call, last question on the table for the night, and then we'll let Sam express our gratitude to Sam for his time. Thank you so much, Sam. Rita, go ahead.
Sam, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. I have a question for you, and this is really getting down to the bottom, is if we got a group of people, as Vic had suggested, from every community board, who do you think we should target? Not the guy, I don't want, I want to go to somebody who can make a decision. Who do you think that person should be that we can target? And I'll tell you why I say this, is that Ed Hartzog was involved with us when HPD came out and said that every single person living in a one-bedroom apartment had to downsize to a studio. And that just seemed archaic. And we formed a group. I went around to all the Mitchell Lamas that I could get to for money. We hired a lawyer, and Ed was my personal lawyer, and we won. We won. They stopped that. They realized that was draconian, and it was, and they were doing it. HPD was doing it to save money, because the Section 8, the voucher part in a studio is much less than for a one-bedroom apartment. So who would you target? Who would you go to and make them listen?
Well, it depends what the issue is, right? We've talked about so many different.
Let's Mitchell Lama.
Mitchell Lama.
Now I know, and the reason I say that is that I've offered for Ed and Greg and anybody, is that I have a fairly good relationship with our management. I live in a Mitchell Lama, a previous Mitchell Lama. Dog is very cute.
She's looking for attention.
He likes, he can see himself on TV. Is that I spoke to the owner of my building and I said, I know the developers of Mitchell Lama made a great deal of money. Several had several developments. And he said, yeah, we really did make money. I said, so what was the problem? He said, it was the paperwork. It was the paperwork. They couldn't wait to get rid of the paperwork. But let me tell you, during this pandemic, we had over 100 empty apartments, and the apartments that are still, that I still got to, in the buyout, I wouldn't allow everybody to be bought out. They had to pay those people who were Section 8 eligible, got Section 8. And the other people got a LAP program, which is more like a stable rent stabilization. So we went to the city council with that, and we went all over. But now let's say we get everybody from all the community boards and talk about affordable housing, and we take the information that Marco gave us and Cohen gave us. Who do we go to? Who do we go to who is in a position to make a decision?
I'm sorry, I still don't understand. Is the goal to make new Mitchell Lamas or to preserve existing?
A new Mitchell Lama.
New Mitchell Lama. So you're going to need city and state alliance, and so that means getting the mayors, HPD, and Department of City Planning on board, and also getting the state legislature and the governor on board. It's not going to be imposed from one without the other.
In the federal government, would you go to the guru of housing, the commissioner of housing?
In the federal government, yeah, Marcia Fudge at HUD would be useful, but I think more important, we have Chuck Schumer as one of the most powerful people in the world right now.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I said we have Chuck Schumer in the position of one of the most powerful people in the world right now. I think he's more powerful than the HUD secretary when it comes to how money is going to be spent on housing. Obviously, he couldn't get us Build Back Better, but the only reason that there was going to be that much money for NYCHA in the first place was because of Chuck Schumer. So I guess the issue fundamentally is community boards have consulting power, but not decision-making power on many key housing issues. So you want to exert your influence on those who do have the decision-making power. And I would say at this moment, there's a new city council, there's a new mayoral administration, there's very nervous people in Albany whose districts are getting redrawn, and a governor who wants to be reelected. This is a time when people are listening. It's not necessarily a time when they want to anger a lot of people. And so the question of where is the question I always raise with New Mitchell-Lama. If you've all told me that your area is fully built out and you also want to not demolish anything, then I don't know where New Mitchell-Lama housing is built. But I also leave that among you to make the decision collectively about where you want to push for that sort of thing. But I guess I would say that use your collective symbolic power as community boards from all over the city to pressure those with real decision-making power at all levels, because in some ways they're listening more now than they might have been a couple of years ago.
Yeah, because I just work with the people over at Lakeview on 106th Street and 5th Avenue. And they were Mitchell-Lama, and the owners who own them died. And there was a lot of fighting. So somebody came who actually is an investor in my building, bought Lakeview, which was very smart because as people move out, he's going to convert to market rate, and he's got a view of the lake of Central Park, which is really quite beautiful. He has a huge, but he's not losing money because he's getting money from the federal government that makes up the difference between the market rate value of his apartment and the subsidy that the tenant gets. So it's a win. So he's really getting market rate value for every.
Right.
So I don't understand why nobody wants it. Everybody's getting market rate.
Well,
and
some people can get more than quote unquote fair market rate. We can talk more about this another time, but the subsidies only go up to what's called fair market rate. And in the Upper East Side, you can make a lot more than what's considered the fair market rate.
It's odd though, because we get, every year we have to be recertified. Yes. And we are told what the market rate of our apartment is. It's the same thing that people coming in and renting it for. It's the exact same thing. So.
Well, like I said, I think organizing collectively among the community boards and pushing with the decision makers is the way to go. There's a lot of advocates who would get behind a push for more Mitchell-Lama right now.
Thank you.
You can show that there's political support.
Thank
you. You all for inviting me.
Thank you so much for your time. You and Vic were fantastic tonight. Thanks for sticking around as long as you did. You gave us a lot to think about. Thank you for that. Good luck. I think we're in the old business section at this point. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. Thank you for your questions. It's my hope that we can get Sam and Vic back for additional conversation, but I think what they were putting on the table in terms of the way in which we have to think and engage with other community boards was critical. And Rita, to your last sort of point that you made, this might be an opportunity to make something happen, and we need to take advantage of it. We're in the old business section. Rita, do you want to jump in? Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, if this is old business too, but I think that instead of calling up and contacting each housing committee in each district, community board district, that why would you consider going to the new borough president, who has every community board under his auspices, and going and pitching this to him and getting that coalition of everybody, of all community boards together. I think he's the person that we should go to. How do you feel about it?
I think it's very wise strategy to work with the borough president. I think engaging with other, I think that's a great pathway to engaging with other boards. Definitely. I think ultimately this is a people powered sort of exercise. And so if he can help, create lanes for us to connect with other boards, I think that's beneficial for us. Any relationships we have with other boards, I think will be beneficial for us. But again, I think the starting point is to clarify the 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 things that are most important so other folks have something to jump onto.
Do you want to have a committee go and meet with Borough President Levine?
I think that'd be great. I mean, I think the last time we met, we talked about working groups, and one of the working groups was related to engaging with other boards. So between this meeting and our next meeting, why don't we put out the word to our community, to our committee members, and talk about who wants to jump on board with that effort to reach out to the borough president and beyond.
I am volunteering to be on that committee.
Love it.
Love it.
Thank you, Rita.
Yeah.
I see another hand up there too. Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Actually.
Beautiful. Got it. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And there's more work to be done in between these meetings as well. At our last meeting, we talked about generating a letter in response to the governor's state of the state. Rita and did some work on that. Marco did some work on that. Ed and I sort of put it on pause because we wanted to get through this conversation because we thought this might be useful for us. Hopefully tonight's engagement will help us continue to fortify that draft. Rita, is there anything you want to add about that? Feel free. There you go.
Best way for me to talk is muted. I sent you an email of just basically what I said today. You know that I reached out to you and Ed and said, I don't really know what you want to put in that letter. So I enumerated everything. I've sent you another one, which was a little bit harder. And if you go over it, if you give feedback, then we can continue. So thank you.
I think that's the right next step for us as co-chairs. And by the way, speaking of co-chairs, we have a new co-chair. It's me, it's Ed, and Rebecca Lamort will join us as co-chair. She couldn't join us tonight because of pre-existing work engagement, but she'll be joining us as the third co-chair. So there'll be a trio in the Housing Committee once again. And we're all very excited about what the year ahead brings. On that note, time for new business. Any new business on the table? Anybody wants to bring up? Floor is open. All right. Ed, you ready to button us up for tonight?
Yeah, we're all set. I think. Anybody have any entertain a motion to adjourn from anyone, or I have no new business, so right? No
thumbs up. I see. I see.
Waving. Motion to adjourn from Rita. Looks like a second for Billy.
Beautiful.
Okay. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Appreciate it. Thank you for your presence. More to come.
Thanks, guys.